The meeting to order. Good evening and welcome. I'm going to call the special joint meeting of the Nevada City Council and the Planning Commission to order. Today is Thursday, June 29th, 2023, and it is 5:34 p.m. I would like to ask somebody like Daniela to do the Nisenan land recognition.
Be honored to.
Thank you.
We acknowledge that the Nisenan people are still here among us today, though nearly invisible. We understand that we are on Nisenan land that was never ceded, and the original tribal families have yet to recover from the near genocide of their people. As a resident or visitor in Nisenan land, we support the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe in efforts to stabilize their people, as well as their campaign to restore federal recognition.
Thank you. Would everybody join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, first I'd like to thank the Planning Commission Chair Nye and the entire Planning Commission for sharing some meeting space with us this evening. I will note that Council Member Cece will not be with us this evening as he is rehearsing for Guys and Dolls. And Vice Chair Cobden will not be joining us either. Two other of the planning commissioners are MIA, and I don't have anything in my script about them, so I'm not going to say anything. We'll just hope
Stick
that
to the script, sir.
They show up. Madam Deputy Clerk, can we have a roll call?
You can. I'm going to share
Joint roll call.
Adam's mic. So Commissioner Ermshar, not here yet. Commissioner Brown, not here yet. Commissioner Van Zant.
Here.
Vice Chair Cobden out, and Chair Nye.
Here.
Okay, Councilmember Cece out. Councilmember Klein.
Here.
Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Fernandez.
Here.
Mayor Fleming.
Present.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Public comment, Government Code Section 5495 4.3 provides that any member of the public may address the City Council and Planning Commission tonight on any matter not on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. The Brown Act, with limited exceptions, does not allow the council, commission, or staff to discuss issues brought forth under public comment. The council cannot take action on non-agenda items. Concerns may be referred to staff or placed on a future agenda. Please note that comments from the public will also be taken when on the one agenda item tonight when it is heard. Okay. So I guess we're just kicking into it, right? Here comes Dan. That's not one of the people. All right. So business, consideration of a presentation of the draft climate adaptation and public safety element 2023 to 2028 process, including review and input from the public. And then I'm going to hand this over to our interim planning director. What do you go, director? City planner, okay. City planner, who will introduce the topic and consultant team that is with us this evening. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Doug. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. I know it's hard with competing priorities in the summer. This is a workshop for our safety and noise element of our general plan. We're calling this effort our CAPC. I'm sure you've all heard about it, and it stands for Climate Adaptation and Public Safety. I'm Lisa McCandless, interim city planner for the city of Nevada City. Typically, the safety element of the general plan is updated approximately every 5 years. Ours has never been updated, and since the adoption of our general plan in 1986. We'll eventually need to update other elements of our general plan, which will include circulation, conservation, land use, and open space. Partway through this project, it was decided to include an update to our noise element as well. So we have a consultant on the line for that specific section. The project was grant funded and led by Amy Wolfson, the city planner that worked here for about 8 years. She just vacated her position and started a job with the city of Grass Valley, so I will be seeing this through to adoption. The work started approximately 2 years ago in August 2021, and it included a public survey and outreach, agency outreach. So at this point in time, we are receiving input on our draft document and hoping to address any concerns. And tonight, we're having a presentation by our consultants, and there will be time for questions and discussion following each presentation. We also encourage written comments to be sent to my email address, which is lisa.mccandless@nevadacityca.gov. Tonight is a good opportunity to have question and answer directly with the consultant, so please don't be shy with questions that come up. I'd like to introduce our consultant, Gary Price, of Price Consulting Services. He's a local to Nevada City. He's done the last 3 housing elements for the city of Nevada City. His sub-consultants will be with us on the Zoom call, and they will be discussing the climate adaptation and the noise portion of our document. And I will let Gary more formally introduce them before their presentations. We also have a sign-in sheet. If folks could please sign in and let us know that you're here. And again, we welcome all comments after the presentation. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks, Lisa. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and the 2 planning commissioners tonight. It's nice to have an opportunity to kind of air the draft document that we posted less than a week ago. So it's fresh and it's still going under some review. So this is an opportunity to gain public input, hear some initial comments, maybe get some questions answered, and then from there we'd be jumping into adoption of the document. So we do have a PowerPoint that I put together with the staff, and I really appreciate Lisa stepping in with spending so much time with Amy, and Sam's in the background here. We spent quite a bit of time. Sean's really been working with us to really tighten down the document. So it's really a collaborative effort between staff and the consultant. And as I always do, we have a document that's a city-built document, not a consultant-built document. So do you want to start the? Okay, so you may have already seen this, but the next one, please. So Lisa and Sean have been pretty, other staff as well, but they're here. Next one. So the presenters tonight will be myself, Eric Vaughn, who is with Rincon Consultants, who do safety elements and general plans, but they stepped up for us to do the climate adaptation assessment. And Paul Bullard with Bullard Acoustic Consultants is here. He did the noise information background report and helped me produce the noise element part of the document. And Foster Morrison, who prepared the last, I believe, 2 updates to the local hazard mitigation plan, helped with providing background information, mapping, and analysis, but they're not here tonight. So next, please. So the agenda overview is we're going to be looking at just a general broad brush of the safety element. Then we're going to get into different sections of the document, including the climate adaptation, where Eric Vaughn will be making a presentation. There's actually an appendix A of the safety element that is the climate assessment and a critical part of this whole thing. The noise element, which is kind of an optional thing, but we felt since it was part of the original public safety element, we decided it would be appropriate to update that as well. And then I've been working on the environmental review with Lisa, and then we have a public review schedule. So next, please. As Lisa mentioned, the general plan was last updated with the exception of the housing element in 1986. Under state law, safety element is supposed to promote the protection of the community from unreasonable risks. And the climate adaptation part is is a new requirement in state law, and it integrates the climate adaptation and environmental justice and updates policies and programs in the document. So we decided to include the noise element, as I mentioned. It is a mandatory part of the element, but that part of the element doesn't have to be updated, but we felt it was important to do that. Next, please. So we're working right now with CAL FIRE to review the document, and it's required for their review in areas where you have significant fire hazards. The entire city is considered a very high fire severity zone. So they've been partnering with us. We received finally their comments on the draft yesterday, and we're working to get our responses back to them, and so it can go to the Board of Forestry for their review in July. And the document is being funded primarily from a state grant, Housing Community Development, which looks at housing production, housing productivity, and the link between the safety element is to create more information to be able to facilitate housing in our town, consistent with our housing element. Next, please. So safety element, as I mentioned, is a required element of the general plan. It helps the cities against threats to public health as a policy document, responds to natural and human-caused disasters. And the state now requires it to be regularly updated, whereas before it wasn't. When we updated the housing element, that's when it linked, that was the link to us having to jump into the safety element update. However, there's been fairly recent legislation that requires that the safety element be updated when the local hazard mitigation plan is updated. So that's something we need to think about. It also brings together existing documents in the general plan. So the general plan, 7 mandated elements, and they all have to be consistent with each other. So one of the things we're looking at is making sure that things are consistent with land use, circulation, housing, and that's called internal consistency. Next, please. So the noise element helps protect the city from excessive noise levels. It incorporates provisions under the new safety element. It identifies noise problems. It actually has, we've taken some measurements throughout the town, identifies problem noise areas, establishes noise guidelines, which we really don't have right now. We have the noise regulations, which are a bit outdated, and then we have the noise safety element, but it doesn't really bring in the more recent state laws regarding noise. It provides projections for future noise levels so we can plan for future land uses, which will be coming soon, or in the next 10 years, hopefully. Next. Recent changes to the state law have included the vulnerability assessment for climate change, development of resilient goals, policies, and objectives to protect the community relative to climate adaptation, and it implements increased adaptation to build resilience in the community. So when we took this on, we wanted to kind of look at, we have the old general plan, but we were looking at the housing element, and it's got a more modern format. So I tried to create a document that can be consistent in format with the current housing element, but also looking very carefully at the county's safety element. And I really think they've done an outstanding job. They've separated their sections by different categories, and then the categories are cross-referenced to the policies and programs. And so what I tried to do is link that approach so that there's some consistency between the county and the city's safety element. After all, you know, we're a very small agency with very limited resources, rely a lot on the county and state agencies for assistance. So we thought that was a good approach, and it seems to go over pretty well. Next, so there's the CAPC is broken into several specific safety categories, such as climate change, resiliency, and adaptive capacity, emergency preparedness, and evacuation, fire hazards and protection, very similar to the county safety element, flood hazards, geologic hazards, public safety service facilities, hazardous materials and mining activities, severe weather, noise exposure, and other considerations. So that's how it's formatted. We created a number of appendices. At the end of the document, we have the list of goals and policies and programs, similar to the way we've done it in the housing element, similar to the way the county does it in their safety element. And then we have several very important appendices, including the climate vulnerability assessment, the local hazard mitigation plan for Annex the city, the noise element background report, which Paul did, and a list of critical facilities from the local hazard mitigation plan, and then public participation program and definitions. So as Lisa had mentioned, we had a pretty thorough kickoff in August of 2021. We've had flyers circulated. We had an actual survey conducted on concerns. Some of the highlights of the survey included a need for fire, drought, and power failure related issues. And then the need for communication. UMANET has the highest percentage of daily use in communication channels. Smoke detectors are important. So the public safety, we did a public safety committee meeting in September, and then we had a noise workshop held at Pioneer Park back on March 16th, 2022. I know there's been some concerns about the length of time this has taken, and there was a purpose for kind of holding back on not coming up with something quick, because we felt like the longer we wait, the fresher the data would come in, and we were hoping that maybe more information could be pulled from an update to the local hazard mitigation plan, which wasn't to happen. But other things of importance has been some fairly recent mapping from FEMA, like the flood inundation levels, which have helped us guide some of the more recent policies and programs to address flooding. So there's been some really good reasons to hold off. The grant's kind of coming to closure, so we really need to finish this up by September. So we did some public outreach, letters circulated to public agencies. We had a joint meeting in June of 2021 with the Plan Commission City Council. We had the CAL FIRE review, which we're currently working with. And then we had this meeting, and then we have a scheduled Planning Commission meeting with a public hearing for recommendation of adoption in July, and a public hearing with the council hopefully in August to wrap everything up. So before we break off into the different discussions by the noise and the climate change folks, do you have any questions?
I have one. The noise element, does that include new data, like new ambient noise readings and stuff like that?
Yes,
around?
Paul Bullard's going to explain that.
Okay.
He's going to show you how we came in with the noise contours. They were done this year.
Oh, great.
So we have some really good data on that.
Thank you.
What about the LHMP? Has that been updated recently? What is the status of
It
our,
was,
are we just piggybacking off?
we have
of
Alex
county?
from the Nevada County Office of Emergency Services here. She's going to talk a little bit about what they're doing. But that was adopted, I think, in 2017. And it's good through September 19th of this year. And I know that they're struggling to, first of all, get a grant, which I think they have approved, to pay for that. And it's a multi-jurisdictional plan that'll include Truckee, Nevada City, Grass Valley, and the county, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
And then we can dovetail from that, and any new information in our document for that.
Excellent, thanks.
Sure.
Gary, I see here you have a letter circulated to interested public agencies, Native American Heritage Commission, and various Native American tribes. Did you have contact with the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe?
We sent out letters to all of the tribes on the list at the time in 2021.
Okay,
Didn't include the Nisenan at the time.
okay.
And there's specific provisions in state code that require us to reach out to the tribes
To federally
for
recognized tribes,
consultation.
right?
And we did receive a letter from the Auburn tribe, I believe, saying that they're not interested in consultation. We're not, and there was, so at this point, we assume that there is no interest in doing consultation.
Mm-hmm.
We will be sending a letter to the Nisenan because they are now on our list.
That's great. And is the list comprised of federally recognized, or is it also state recognized?
Both.
Because, okay, yeah, because they're more recently recognized by the state, so.
Yeah, well, actually, the Heritage Commission of the state is kind of an arm of the feds, but they do their own thing too, and they do more local things. So there's a lot of tribes, unfortunately, that are not certified. And there's quite a bit that goes through to get certification.
Sure,
So-
and many of them are stripped of it. So thank you. I'm glad to hear that you will be reaching out to the Nisenan.
Yep.
What other tribes did you reach out to?
I don't have the list in front of me, but there's about 5 tribes that are on the list, and we can get that to you.
Thanks.
It should be in the public participation program. That's a appendix D that has the whole list. But, we didn't get any comments back at this
Yeah.
point. So, any other questions or comments? Maybe, Lisa, you could send everybody that list that we sent. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Eric Vaughn, who's with Rincon, has a very good understanding of our community and the climate issues. And maybe, Gabby, you could bring him up. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
Thanks for being
Hi,
here
everyone.
tonight.
Good evening.
So
Hi,
we
Eric.
have most of the council members here. We have 2 planning commissioners here. We have a few folks from the public here. And we thought we would go through the PowerPoint presentation that you have, and maybe you can just have, can you see the PowerPoint?
I could, and now I don't.
Okay, so why don't you do the controls of that?
Oh, you want me
Or
to
how
share?
do you want to do this? You could share your screen if you want.
Okay. Share screen. Okay. Let me get that up. Okay. This should be the same deck I was following along.
Yeah,
okay.
perfect. Yeah, there we go.
This is great. Okay, everyone can see it?
Got it.
All right.
Can we see him
It's great to
too?
be with you this evening. Thank you for having me. I'll be talking through the climate vulnerability assessment that informs some of the policies that made it into the CAPC. So I'll talk through some of the climate risks that we assessed, and if any information you're interested in terms of sources of data and process. Happy to entertain any questions that you might have. So in summary, the climate change vulnerability assessment evaluated climate change with specifically impacts to people, built environment, and the natural environment specific to Nevada City, providing a foundation for policies and actions that would be in the safety element. And then I like to think about these climate VAs as sort of tools for understanding sort of where the focus point should be based on the specific vulnerabilities in an area. So for example, Nevada City might not be too interested in sea level rise. That might be not a very compelling topic for the context, but wildfire risk, maybe specifically. So across all the different types of climate risks, we focus on the specific risks that relate most to the area, and then the sort of specific vulnerabilities within the community, within the environment and in the environment. So temperature is sort of the starting point when we look at climate change. Temperature changes driven by changes in CO2 in the atmosphere. Those relate to one another. So we looked at different, they're called representative concentration pathways. These are just global models that look at how the globe is going to be affected by climate change, and then we downscale that data is downscaled to the local level into grids. And for the Nevada City area, the projections range from 6 to 9 degrees overall. That's average temperature change. And that's relative to the baseline. And the baseline in this case is a period of around the last 30 years. So 1960 through 1990, I think, was the initial baseline. This is all based on California's 4th climate assessment, which was based on the previous national assessment. California's current, since the national assessment's been updated last year, California's in the process of updating their assessment. The 5th assessment is underway right now, but this is based on the 4th assessment. So beyond increases in temperature and sort of changes in extreme heat, precipitation and snowpack is another big topic. So when we look at averages, we see that there's going to be little overall change in precipitation if you look at the averages over time. However, having said that, we are going to see pretty dramatic changes over the century in the way that, in the timing and the how much rain falls in events. We're seeing increased variability. And so there will be fewer storms that occur in sort of the mean or the middle of our rainfall patterns, more on the low side and more on the high side. This year is a great example of a very unusually wet year with a lot of atmospheric river events. And there's new research coming online looking at atmospheric river events. This is kind of a new research topic that's pretty complicated. So scientists are trying to understand how climate change is going to affect these type of extreme weather events. But certainly this year was pretty intense. So snowpack, you're probably familiar with this, but as the temperatures increase, it is expected that there will be less precipitation in the form of snow. And kind of an interesting caveat to that, and something that I think people have experienced in the last few years, is that as the storms are in sort of warmer climates, as the snow is in warmer climates, we get a different kind of snow, we get a heavier snow. And so you can expect as we get into higher temperatures that we can expect these type of wetter snow events that can cause all sorts of havoc, as many communities in Nevada County have experienced over the last couple of years. So wildfire risk is another big topic. Climate change is expected to intensify wildfire risk in association with many other factors that create wildfire risk. But climate change with higher temperatures, more evapotranspiration, frequent drought events, we can expect wildfire risk to increase in an already high risk area. And this is just showing some of the research that's been done. This is research that was again associated with California's fourth assessment, modeling change in the probability of wildfire risk. And as you can see, there is pretty substantial increases in risk. And this is again associated with the type of climate conditions that lend itself to an intensification and an extensification of occur. There would be conditions that would be likely to increase the sort of the damage. Okay, so given that context, we looked across people, the built environment, critical facilities, and sort of open space ecosystems to understand how these different climate risks would impact different groups and communities. We wanted to identify a few types of populations that would be specifically sensitive to some of these climate changes. And with wildfires, I didn't mention this, but I should. One of the other sort of effects that we're all experiencing is wildfire smoke. And I know that, there have definitely been some experiences in the last few years locally with that. And, we're seeing what's happening on the East Coast right now. And I think we all know exactly what it's like to have experienced that ourselves. So these are some of the groups that we wanted to identify as being particularly sensitive to some of these climate impacts. Folks like seniors who might, mobility might be challenged, financial hardships, difficulty in keeping properties clear, the vegetation and all that. Economically disadvantaged groups and financial hardships make it more difficult to adapt some of these adaptations to climate change as it gets hotter and wildfire risk increases, drought conditions increase. Folks with disabilities, again, with sort of pre-existing health impacts and financial hardships, reduce mobility. Renters who, again, may just not have the same financial assets as others, or the ability to sort of make sure their properties are up to date and able to adapt to these changing conditions. And then, wanted to also identify, just because it's such a big part of the economy, with visitors and seasonal residents, coming in and out so frequently, that just making sure that, some of the existing communication channels can reach folks, and that sort of that group, we're aware that group may also, we want to make sure we're prepared for that. Okay, in terms of the built environment, we looked at municipal buildings, sort of their location, medical facilities, some of these, critically important facilities to the community, in terms of like power outages, potential damage, flooding, wildfire risk, things like that. Of course, the historic downtown, which is beautiful and irreplaceable. Also residential, commercial, industrial development, roadways and transportation. And then in terms of the environment, looking at open space, parks, surrounding lands, and some of the vital importance that plays, the role that plays, and the importance of it within Nevada City. With some of these climate risks, we have extreme heat and drought, and kind of the pernicious cycle that can happen when you have extended periods of drought, and then you have increased wildfire risk, wet years when there's vegetative buildup, sort of trying to understand what's happening with the environment and trying to figure out what the best way is to keep it, make sure that it's able to adapt, and we're adapting to the changing conditions. Municipal services, of course, water and wastewater, to deal with different flow regimes, water availability changing with drought, with sort of, bigger variability in the hydrology and the rain that's happening, and trying to think about what kind of options, could be in place, whether it's working with water providers for water conservation, whether it's thinking about different options for reducing water use, things like that. energy, of course, we've all been experiencing power disruptions associated with different climate hazards, and thinking through grid reliability, and also, the effect that this climate extremes are having on the grid, and how to protect it and try and keep people's power on. And also the response process as well. We've seen the power shut off, and we've seen damage to the grid, and how much time it's taking to get folks' power back online. So trying to think through, what can be done to improve the responsiveness of our utilities. And of course, an important part of this is fire and emergency services, having to respond to more climate extremes, helping communities to prepare all the different programs the fire departments have in place for helping communities prepare, and the programs that they have to reduce risk. These are all extremely important capacities. Okay, so when we looked across all these different factors, here are some of the things we thought about, and we wanted to make sure some of these recommendations were distinct, because I know, like, for example, Gary and the team went into a lot more detail about things like managing wildfire risk in a different section, so we didn't want to repeat that. We wanted to think about the types of things that would help the idea of adaptive capacity, which is to say, what are some of the fundamental things that the city could help support its communities and its environment and its built infrastructure to help adapt as things are changing. And so the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about adaptive capacity is relationships and coordination, and I'm sure this is already a big emphasis within the city, but just wanted to highlight its continued importance with adaptation, as resources are so spread out, and there's so many externalities to consider as well, especially with something like wildfire risk, where you're looking at scenarios where fire would not necessarily come from within the city, but would come from another part. So that coordination with the county, with different fire departments, and also with all the different state programs that support adaptation, this is just going to continue to be really important. Disaster preparedness and response, if we can expect more climate hazards to be more intense, to be occurring more frequently, and for the conditions to sort of make that more likely, really want to think through the disaster preparedness, like what's in place, and the response readiness, and practice, and all these different mechanisms for making sure those are tip top, and will probably be increasingly important over time. And then, of course, how city facilities, services, parks, and the open space are managed with respect to climate change as environmental conditions are changing. The design criteria, the way services are delivered, the way open space is managed. These would all, the way these are done would all need to sort of reflect these changing conditions. So, being open to, reviewing design criteria and making sure that we're thinking through not just what the past has held for us in terms of, designing for, the historic record of temperature for roads, for example, but thinking through how those things might change and design criteria that reflect those changes. And with private property, of course, it's, what can we all do to help, everyone in the community sort of adapt their environment, and through the way people are managing their own properties, improve the overall health and safety of the community as a whole. So, thinking about things like vegetative management on property, it's, we're all sort of in this together, right? So, thinking through what kind of programs and policies and support mechanisms we can put in place to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to adapt, and through those adaptations, through the mitigation activities, the city can become safer as a whole.
Okay.
Just kind of rocked through that.
I might ask the mayor to see who has any questions from the council and the plan commission. We could actually open any questions up from the public as well, because Eric's is going to be leaving after this.
Okay, so first we'll check in the room for some public comment. If there's anybody who wants to comment on this issue, please come up. If There's anybody in cyberspace, Gabby? There's not. Okay, so we have no public comment, then we're going to.
Hold on a second, we do.
Oh, Theo.
So we have time for somebody to go first.
Well, no, it's you, man. Welcome.
Hey, thanks. My name's Diego Fatanides, live here in Nevada City, and it's just awesome to get this.
Sorry.
Awesome to get this work done, and it's going to be such a benefit. Thank you for the diligent work on it. I don't know what the standard is for the diligence, but it seems pretty good to me. I'll send some more detailed comments to the city, but for context of what I'm going to say, the NFPA reports about fire.
Could you speak up a little?
Yeah.
Thanks.
The NFPA reports that most initial structural losses during wildfire events begin as low-intensity fires near the structure. And then if there are other nearby structures, the factors primarily become age of the building and proximity to a burning structure. And so we have that in Nevada City, obviously. And so I'd really like to see a little bit more weight put into structures as fuel in this, because this is going to be a document that's going to inform us for a long time in the future.
I just want to preface that we're going to have lots of time to talk at the end about those bigger picture questions, but we're just asking questions about climate change and any questions you have of Eric, because we're going to take him out of here.
Got it.
And, some of those questions are above my, my pay grade.
Yeah.
So-
Okay.
So I don't mean to cut you off, but those, I think, are really pertinent to some of the later discussions.
Thank you. Separated.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I understand what you're doing. Generally, in public comment, he gets to
Oh,
comment
come
on
on
whatever
up.
he would
Yeah,
like to comment
yeah, of
on.
course.
We don't stifle public
Okay,
comment.
no,
I'm
that's-
sorry.
I'm
Or
sorry.
interrupt. Yeah.
Yeah, I am sorry.
It's quite all right.
And so I can respond, I mean, who did write the wildfire stuff if it's not in your purview? I'd be interested in knowing that. So page 32, fire protection, the fuels section, structures are listed as also fuel, which is really confusing to me because they're kind of the most important fuels when we're looking at structure loss and proximity of our neighborhoods. So I think that should really be amended to be higher heft. Similar issue on page 34 in the WUI fires section. And that the mapping element doesn't seem to consider into its model the density of structures and the percentage of structures that would need to ignite in order to create a conflagration. And they do that modeling for fuels. And, but when they say fuels, they mean vegetation. And so it just really needs to soak into the fire community, and it is, but it's trickling down, that structures need to be modeled similarly. And I know it's starting. And the WUI section, thank you, does mention that structure hardening and defensible space maintenance is the most effective, but it doesn't get into how we're going to do that. Page 37, 38, again, includes some building codes, but it's about structure fire, so that's talking about interior sprinklers, nothing to do with the really important list that CAL FIRE put out about the low-cost upgrades, retroactive, that the building code won't enforce yet unless we make an amendment to it, because it's not going to trigger for most things, as far as they understand, without a significant remodel or a new construction, which is not our issue in Nevada City. We're not going to have most of the buildings be significantly remodeled. So most of the buildings are not going to be retrofitted unless we take a stand. I do appreciate later in the document, there's a lot of specific policies, FP14, FP1E, and then Section 5.5, private property. But there's no mention of actually making an ordinance to increase the force from the city to do these really significant community upgrades to existing buildings. So I would really recommend inclusion at least of mention that it would be helpful, which is pretty factual, for there to be an ordinance or change to the building code to something similar to earthquake retrofit requirements that started in LA. And we already make private property owners do things to their houses. And so I'd really like to see the retrofit ordinance be at least mentioned as a possible tool here. And then I'd also very much appreciate if it's legal, if Pucci can pass it to put it under one of the programs. Because there is like vague mention of update building to exceed building hardening requirements. It's really unclear what that means. I think there might be a typo in there too. So I think I've made my point.
What page is that?
That's program FP1E of the Appendix A. And then page 41, section 5.5, I think of Appendix A as well. Just a little note, private property, wildfire. The section's just out of date and needs updating based on new ordinance revision. It's just the paragraph is from a little while ago. So thank you.
Thanks, Theo, appreciate it. Yeah, and I didn't mean to,
No, I think it's right on.
yeah,
Sorry.
sorry, I just, I know we're losing him, but
Yeah.
people get to speak. We should also put a clock on public comment, maybe. All right, so carry on, sorry.
No, that's great. Eric, any further responses to, did you hear there's some really excellent comments just made, and it just seems like they are related to climate change. We have to be very cognizant of like the existing development in Nevada City, historic. We're not going to see, a lot of new development, so the emphasis is going to be retrofit. Really interested in this Los Angeles ordinance about retrofit. Do you have any comments on that?
On retrofitting structures?
Yes.
Yeah. No, nothing specific. I mean, I thought they were all good points. I think it's an important aspect of managing fire risk for sure. Not being too familiar with all the tools that are out there for sort of helping to promote, to see those through policy or ordinance or all the different mechanisms that we have at our disposal. I'm sure there's a lot of great examples in LA. I'm sure is maybe front and center for where those at. But yeah, I guess I don't have too much to comment on that other than appreciate hearing it.
Okay, Eric, was there any other questions?
Anybody from the council or commission, would you guys like to ask Eric any questions before we lose him? Gary, anybody? Okay. I think we're good here as far as questions, Eric. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, no problem. And of course, happy to respond to any comments, written comments that your commissioners or council members might have, just to improve the vulnerability assessment.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to Paul Bullard, who is next in line. Paul? This is Paul Bullard. He's with Bullard and Associates. I work with him on a lot of projects throughout California. He knows more about noise than anybody I know. And so, Paul, maybe you could give a presentation from the PowerPoint. Can you share your screen, or do you want us to do it?
You know what? I'm certainly going to try.
Thank you.
Let's see here.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I guess
No.
I did.
We'll give it our best shot. Did that work?
Yes.
Perfect.
Oh, hallelujah. Okay. So, first of all, I want to thank you. I'm sorry I'm looking at one screen over here and my camera's over here, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to work in such a beautiful community. We do noise element and noise ordinance updates all over the state of California. And, oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And it really is a pleasure to work in this community, so I want to thank you for that. Gary's asked me to make a brief PowerPoint about noise and the noise element update process. And because I suspect not everyone has equal levels of familiarity, I thought the first slide would be appropriate just to introduce what is noise and how do we talk about it and describe it and what have you. So I'll go through this very carefully without hopefully getting too deep into the weeds. But the unit of noise is the decibel, and I would anticipate that people are familiar with that term. When sound waves impact our eardrums, and the ear is an amazing organ, our ears can perceive a million-fold range of sound pressure levels impacting them. So Alexander Graham Bell himself came up with the decibel scale to compress that range of pressures into a more manageable range. So as you can see from the thermometer here, we've got levels from down at 0 up to about 160 for decibels. And simply stated, noise is unwanted sound. So some noises are very pleasant, some sounds are very pleasant, some are less so. within the range of sounds that we hear on a day-to-day basis, it usually ranges from about 30 decibels, which might be a background level in our bedrooms as we're waking up. Maybe the only thing generating noise is your air conditioning system or a distant hum from your refrigerator, up to levels in the 70s or 80s, for example, if you're driving in your car or you happen to be right next to Highway 49 looking over for some reason. But that's sort of the range. You don't get into these extreme values that you see in the thermometer here. For example, babies with brand new hearing that hasn't been affected by exposure to noise over time have perfect hearing, and that's sort of the threshold is 0. The threshold of pain, if you've ever had cause to experience that, most of us have, is around 120 to 130 decibels, at which point you will involuntarily move to plug your ears or find some relief. So that is the decibel scale. As you can see, there's a whole host of different types of noise sources and noises that make up our day-to-day existence. And the purpose of the noise element is to really take a good look at the city and say, okay, what generates noise here? Where's our noise generating areas? Where are our noise sensitive areas where people are living? What is the blend that we have within the city? And then to develop policies that both preserve the quiet noise environment that people in residential areas have become accustomed to, as well as preserving the economic base in your more commercial areas by setting your policies to reflect the fact that businesses need to operate and frequently generate sound. So I will move to the next slide. Hopefully this works. That did not. We're going to try it again. Uh-oh. Let me click over here. There we go. I hope I didn't go too many slides ahead.
Perfect.
Nope. Okay. So a little bit about the ambient noise environment in Nevada City. First of all, like most cities, it's got kind of a blend, but in general, Nevada City is a very peaceful, calm, quiet area. As we all know, when you get close to highways 20 and 49, that's your major noise source. Traffic is the most prevalent noise source in the world because we're a very automobile-centric society, and there are roads everywhere. Railroad noise is typically limited to areas near the tracks. We don't have a major railway system through Nevada City. There's some aircraft noise, which is more intermittent, but traffic is the dominant noise source within the city. You've got your intermittent noise sources that are perhaps dispersed local traffic, activities at parks, school playgrounds. Construction is very localized and short-term noise. Property maintenance, your neighbor mowing his lawn or using a leaf blower if that's what they're using. All of these things contribute to the local noise environment. So we used a combination of noise surveys, of state-of-the-art sound propagation algorithms and predictions to sort of come up with an inventory of noise levels within the city, not just for existing conditions, but for future conditions. And the intent of doing that is to assist the city planners when someone comes forth with an application to be able to say, hey, your project is noise sensitive and you want to put this apartment complex or senior housing facility near a noise source. And we need to make sure that the people that move into that area are protected. So there are policies that do that. Conversely, if someone moves into the area and says, I want to open a car wash, for example, then there are policies that say, okay, your car wash can only generate sound levels that reach a certain point once they get to a sensitive receptor. So that is the real purpose of that. And so after quantifying the noise levels, we've developed noise contours, which are basically heat maps. And we're going to, with luck, get to that in our next slide here. Let's see if it advances. Uh-oh. Okay, it advanced over here. There it is. So this is a noise contour map, if you will, of the existing traffic noise environment in the Nevada City area. And as you can see there, the red represents it's a little hotter or noisier the closer you get to the roadway, no surprise there. And as you move further and further away, the sound dissipates into lower and lower levels. And the jaggedness of this graph represents local topography. As sound impacts hills or what have you structures, it becomes attenuated. So they're not just smooth lines. Portions of the city are exposed to a little more noise than others. And again, this is the existing 2020 condition. Look at that on the first button try. We got to the next slide, which is the projected future 2045 condition. And if I just go back and forth, you can see how the sound levels are predicted to change along the roadways over time. And I hope I'm not going back and forth too quickly there, but growth is to be expected in the region as well as locally. Nevada City is a very attractive destination for a lot of reasons. And so it's reasonable to expect that traffic volumes are going to increase. So we were provided future traffic forecasts for the region, and we converted those using our noise prediction model into these contours, is what you're seeing there. It's just sort of an illustration. And these are a little bit worst case because there's extra shielding and ground attenuation that takes place, but it gives you an idea of where the noise is primarily located in your city. There are also areas in town that are not necessarily terribly noise generating, but where they're the more commercial areas, whether it's the Lower Grass Valley Road commercial, Gold Flat, Mohawk Road area, Seven Hills Business Park, areas where patrons would arrive to do their shopping, for example, or have their vehicles repaired, what have you. There may be some things that just generate more noise than you would typically find, say, in a residential area. In one such case is Pioneer Park, which is a beautiful setting. It's got a great backdrop and bandstand for events there. The flip side is it is completely surrounded by residential uses. So there is this asset that the city has in this park, but it needs to be managed because you want to bring a vibrancy to the city with respect to live entertainment, which frequently includes amplified sound. At the same time, respecting the neighbors who live in the area, their right to experience some peace and quiet and not just have events going on there consistently. So that was one of the goals, was to work together with Parks Department and Planning to see what could be done in this area. But that map just sort of generally illustrates where some of the commercial districts are, where we identified higher levels of activity. Broad Street is a great example. Very vibrant, fun area to be in. You've got farmers markets and things that are going on during the different seasons there. Occasionally there's outdoor music being generated in the area. And so that's just a recognized hotter area of the city from the standpoint of potential for sound generation. So we talked a little bit about the fixed noise generators. There's a shooting range in town, Pioneer Park, downtown area, commercial, industrial activities. We talked a little bit about as the city grows with overall growth in the region, we know that traffic's going to increase, which is going to result in higher noise environments. In addition, growth in tourism-related activities, increased commercial activities in the city will all contribute to higher ambient noise levels over time. One thing that's not specifically pointed out here is also short-term vacation rentals. Some communities really struggle with that because people coming in maybe don't have the same degree of sensitivity as the long-term residents. And so that can be an issue with growth in noise in attractive areas such as Nevada City. Once we've done this sort of overall inventory of louder areas, quiet areas, we set up noise meters in parks, in neighborhoods, next to the freeways. It's not just the loud areas, but the quiet areas. Then the goal is to really take a look at the city's policies and say, okay, which need to be updated, refreshed a little bit, which ones need to be thrown out, which are fine and we can leave them in, so that the city planners can make good land use decisions about new applications, so that you're not going to create land use incompatibility. It's really sort of reactive. Somebody comes forth with an application, say, okay, what is it, where is it, and how noisy is it, or how sensitive is it? And then the new noise element contains a broader list of policies and noise standards for a broader range of land uses to remove some ambiguity that was in the existing standards. Your existing standards are not terrible by any means. They just needed to be updated to more to provide the city with more flexibility and also less ambiguity. So I know I raced through that extremely quickly, and I know noise is a topic that's near and dear to many people's hearts. So I have all the time that you need. Are there any questions or comments for me at this point?
Thank you so much. First, we're going to check in the room. Is there anybody who'd like to comment on this? Anybody online?
Nobody online.
Okay. Commissioners, go right ahead.
Council members, I have a couple of questions. Thanks for your thorough presentation, and it's great that you have new data. And I'm Thomas Knight of the Planning Commission, so interesting to hear planning considerations in there. There's a term you used, sensitive receptor, and could you explain that term? It just kind of caught my ear, as it were. What's a sensitive receptor?
I very much appreciate this question. Can you hear me okay still?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, so what drives me nuts is when a city adopts policies, applies noise standards at locations where there is no sensitivity. A classic example might be a hospital. Well, the sensitivity of a hospital, they're very sensitive spaces inside, but outside, they're very noisy, busy locations with people coming and going, emergency vehicles, what have you. So the goal here was to identify where sensitivity exists. For residences, it's your outdoor use space, maybe your backyard. And for residences, it's also your interior living spaces. So there are standards for both that are developed. So for various types of uses, there needs to be an identification of where the sensitivity exists so that the standards can be properly applied. A church, for example, the interior of a worship space is very sensitive. And so you would want to protect that space from intrusion from exterior noise. However, the parking lot of the church or even the property line of the church may have zero sensitivity, right? Nobody's going to care what the level is, at the curb right next to that church, for example. But inside, people are going to care a lot. Schools, for example, playgrounds of schools are very much noise generating, whereas classrooms and school offices are very much noise sensitive. So the goal here was to develop practical noise standards that would be applied at the locations where the noise sensitivity actually exists.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Thanks for that explanation.
That was really good.
I'm very interested in noise, so I have a question.
Okay.
Another one. So noise generators is a term that's used here, and a real noise generator is generators. And I'm not dissing generators. People do feel they have a need or often very critically have a need for consistent power, and we have a really unstable power grid around here. So when power outages occur, lots of very recently installed generators start up. And a noise study around those events would be interesting. If you haven't done that, I'm not, telling you what your job might be, but some people have battery backup systems because they don't like generator noise, and most everybody has an alternative power supply, to meet these situations that are coming up all the time. But if you don't have a generator and you don't have air conditioning, and it's usually hot during public safety power shutoffs, you have to close your windows if you don't want to be driven crazy all night long by the 6 generators in your neighborhood. And I hear this from constituents. So I have a suggestion, and it may not be you to talk to, but I'll say generally, maybe another look at enhanced sound shielding for generators is something we should consider for the benefit of those who don't benefit from generators. So that's a question, comment, and so I wonder if a study has been made about those time periods when power shutoffs occur.
No, that is actually an excellent point. We have done multiple studies over the years. I've been doing this for 35 years, and we've looked at generators in a variety of situations, from the individual use generator to the generators that are affiliated with cellular towers that provide communications to emergency services during power outages. Some jurisdictions exempt the noise generated by generators during power outages or emergency situations. Some don't. Some require that if you're going to install a generator, it needs to have sufficient sound shielding or enclosures or what have you, and that's not an unreasonable thing to require of a residential generator in particular, because there are commercially available silencers and kits. They may not reduce them to inaudibility, but they could make it reduce down to maybe a level that's consistent with the new noise standards that are applied at residential sensitive receptors, for example. So as a community, it's really your call as to how you want to go about treating generators. Do you say, well, if it's an emergency, it's a power outage, we're going to allow them? At the same time, are you going to allow them without some regulation, or are you going to say we're going to apply some reasonable requirements on generator noise emissions, and maybe even have a period of time to allow people to get those installed? So, but it's a great point, and they have been noted as a source of nuisance over time by many folks that we've been in contact with.
And when we approve generator installations, which are ministerial now, but they need to comply with daytime noise emission, which is I think 75 decibels. And reading the specs of the shielded generators that are permanently installed, they're right around 75 decibels. So, and that can go on 24 hours a day. So, just that could be a thing that we might consider. An enhanced sound shield around the manufactured sound shielded units. I'm just throwing that out there because they do operate right up about the 75 decibel level.
Probably louder.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so one, there's ambient impacts, but on the other side, in terms of a policy document, we have policies and programs to update our noise regulations. And so maybe there needs to be some emphasis when we do that on looking at that particular issue for generators, because that's where the tire meets the road, is when we do the regulations. And so that would be an opportunity to start looking at that more carefully.
That was the purpose of my comment. Because we do have power outages that last, like people are out of power for 2 weeks. So generators are running, natural gas generators will run for 2 weeks, right outside your window, which is something to be considered in terms of ambient, intermittent but ambient noise.
It's all part of the apocalypse.
We-
Environment,
Though.
atmosphere.
We've gotten some complaints about people who use generators when they haven't paid their power bill, so there's no power outage, they just are using a generator
Does that
to use
happen?
it on their own, and that probably is a little bit beyond the pale. Yeah, so I like your thoughts. I'm not gonna champion that issue.
No?
I think you could run on it.
Should do it in an election year.
Yeah.
And I have a peeve. This might be a good opportunity to share it as well. When I was a teenager, I liked unmuffled cars. If I had a big leak in my exhaust system, I liked it. And now people, who grew up at the same time as I do, like amplified exhaust systems on vehicles. And and there are utterly unmuffled diesel trucks. I know they're unregulated, some of them for emissions, but they also appear to be unregulated for noise emission. My windows rattle
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
certain diesel trucks come by. Also, there's a brand
Motorcycles as
a
well.
brand of motorcycle that seems to be unregulated in terms of noise emission as well.
As a motorcycle rider, I will say that loud tailpipes do save lives because
Cars don't see us.
Of course they do, and they also have it, and they also have an aesthetic cost to everyone else.
Sure.
So enforcement or prioritization of that consideration would be cool. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say on that topic,
It's in there.
you're not alone, and we hear these concerns also, and it really comes down to enforcement. At the local level, the city can't set a noise standard that would preempt what's already being done at the state motor vehicle code level.
Right.
So it really comes down to enforcement. There are vehicle noise limits in the state motor vehicle code that says how loud each and every vehicle on the road can be. The problem is they're very, very rarely enforced, but it definitely does come down to enforcement.
If I could comment.
Sure.
I
Go
don't
right
know
ahead,
who's
Gary.
running
It's
the
a
show.
free-for-all.
No, I just wanted to comment, I think, along those lines. I did run into that. I, of course, have a really big interest in the Pioneer Park band shell, and I did note that you had a couple spots designated with the red 80 that would require mitigation in that area. But I also understand from reading this report and reading your work is that your job is to measure the sound and to make standard recommendations. But everything else about how we take this information and apply it is up to our local community.
Right.
That's correct.
Yeah, and that goes for motorcycles and band shells. So it's what we do with this information that we get from this report. So it's going to come down to political will.
That's why we're here.
And the purpose of discussing it is to highlight our local concerns and
Exactly.
consider
But he's not going to come
mitigations.
and fix them for us. Bummer, huh?
But thank you for measuring things so accurately.
Thank you for measuring it so well, Ken.
I have a question with regards to sound ordinance, maybe what's typical or what even needs to be considered, if it needs to be considered separately, not just the amplitude of the sound, but also the frequency?
That is another very astute point. And in fact, in the policies that we're recommending or proposing, they're going to be before you. There are penalties that are applied to the noise standards. For example, if a daytime exterior standard is reasonable to be 60 decibels at a residence, just throwing out a number. If that noise source consists of a screech or a hum or a pure tone or something like that, then the standard is actually reduced, because it is known that there are certain types of sources that are more offensive to people. And so that has been built into your recommended standards.
Thank you.
The other thing to consider is the general plan the noise element is a very important guide for new development. So when a new development comes through, it's something to look at you talked about the sensitive receptors and the appropriate location of, maybe some residential versus industrial, that would be a higher noise. So, we have a few policies and programs in there to require noise studies when applicable. And then the noise studies tier off of the general plan table of noise, what's considered acceptable. So that's an important part of the noise element, is to be looking at how we look at noise for new development that occurs.
So a proposed new use would use like an average established a mission measurement for an existing similar activity? Like are there standards for, like, are there established understandings of what of noise that an activity would generally generate?
There's some good examples. Like Paul could expand on that. But for example, if you put an apartment project next to the highway, you want to be looking at the interior noise and creating attenuation programs for the development, so at least a resident can escape the noise from the ambient noise from the highway. Another example would be a use permit, conditional use permit for say, an industrial use that is located next to some residential, then you would want to get a noise study to see how that would impact the residents and what types of noise attenuation walls and things that you would want to place on the use permit for that.
So my question is, since the proposed use isn't an operation, there wouldn't be an actual study of that use until after it's
Yeah.
established.
I can jump in here. For example, let's say you've got an automotive repair facility that's proposed, and it's not there currently, but we know there are some residences nearby. So the city would, planning would review this and say, look, this rises to the level that's going to trigger a noise study. So a firm would be hired that would come in and look at the sensitivity of the receptors. What's the noise environment at those receptors now? And then say, okay, we know for an automotive repair facility of this type that there's going to be compressors, there are going to be impact wrenches, there may be other types of pneumatic tools used, and you would then go to a similar facility and collect your noise level data and superimpose or overlay that on the site with the site design that's being proposed. Where are the roll-up doors, what have you, and project that sound then to the nearest sensitive receptor to determine whether additional mitigation would be required. So you're right, if the use isn't there, there's nothing to measure, but there are a whole host of ways to model that appropriately.
Thank you.
Doug?
Go right ahead, Peter.
In the case that you, in a neighborhood, have excessive noise, whatever, cars, somebody working on cars, whatever, who mitigates that? Who investigates and who tells them to lower it? Well, we have a small police force and they do a good job. I'm not sure they want to be chasing, grass cutting in, the middle of the night or whatever would happen. But if it's serious, if it's a serious violation, who do we call? Would this be,
I would think it would be a public nuisance kind of situation, and you would call law enforcement.
Noise busters.
Who do we call?
You're on.
I'm not sure that's the best use of their time.
Well, we don't have a lot of crime.
We talked on it a little bit, but if it's stationary noise, any noise should be called and directed towards us. If it's stationary noise, that makes it much easier. What I mean by that is when you talked about generators or something, we can monitor that relatively easy. If it's moving noise, like vehicles, much more difficult. They touched on how that's rarely enforced. I've never heard of it being enforced unless it's just obnoxiously, like they don't have an exhaust system on the car and it's a race car, which I have seen those. And those are louder than the decibel level it showed on a 12-gauge shotgun. But if it is stationary noise, probably the most common that I see a lot are either loud parties, not too often here, but loud parties that go well into the night. Those are definitely enforceable and we should be contacted and we can issue citations for those. Okay. Or barking dogs. And barking dogs, we try to mediate as opposed to do enforcement activity immediately, but barking dogs is extremely annoying. When you're trying to go to bed and you got a dog that's, continuously barking next door, that will keep you up. I don't know how some people ignore that, but some people tend to not hear it, and people like me, it keeps me up all night. But yes, we're the people to call. You should always be calling us. And even when I say it could be difficult to enforce, it is up to the council where we want to kind of focus our energies on what we want to enforce. Does that make sense? So even if it's difficult to enforce, difficult does not mean impossible. It's just kind of where you want us to focus our efforts on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
And our dog's name is Bridget, so if you want to address her directly.
Good thing horses don't make noise, right? Yeah, we have a little bit. All right, are there any more questions from the council or the commissioners or anybody in the room? Otherwise, we're going to let Paul finish up. Do you have anything to conclude, Paul? Are you?
No, I don't. Should there be any comments that come further down the pipe, I'm sure Gary will share those with me and we will respond and address them, or if there's any deliberation. If you need me to stick around, I can. If you don't, I can get off of your dime and just respond to any written comments that may come up.
Yeah, I think that's probably it, Paul. I really appreciate, I speak on behalf of the the council, the commissioners. We really appreciate your work, especially in Pioneer Park. That was really nice to see.
Very well done.
Yeah, Gary approves. He's the Pioneer Park guy, so you did a great job.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, bye-bye.
Back to you.
Yeah, so some of the CAPSI highlights I haven't really identified in the PowerPoint, but I think it has to be preferenced by the city's limited resources to address some of the larger public safety issues such as wildfire, flooding, evacuation. And so the city is really dependent on partner agencies like Nevada County, OES, CAL FIRE, NID, to really be successful in addressing public safety issues. So a lot of the policies and programs we have involve a lot of collaboration. So in just some of the highlights, I want to just maybe gloss over with you in the document, but I know we're running a bit late. But the entire city is in a very high fire hazard severity zone. So much of the fire zones are from urban interface areas. Many outside the city's boundaries are somewhat outside the control of the city. Nonetheless, it's within our planning area, so we have to be cognizant of ways to deal with that. And one of the biggest safety concerns of the city is the large amount of fuel load located within the unincorporated lands surrounding the city. And so something can happen, a wildfire can start, and that really can spread quickly to the city and become a catastrophic event. Many of the roadways in the city are single lane. Some are private, some are not city maintained, which can result in restrictive access and constrained evacuation capacity. I know that the county is going to be working to do a capacity analysis of evacuation routes, and that's going to be an important component that would dovetail into perhaps an update to the circulation element of the general plan. Some of the tools that we have right now, they're excellent tools. We have the fire stations on both sides of the city. We have that interagency mutual aid in fire protection. I've been working with Sam in putting some of these programs together, getting the information correct. It gets very complicated. City fire regulations, which we've recently updated. We have the 2016 Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which is in the process of being updated. So I'll let our OES person talk a little bit about that at the end of the meeting. The evacuation capacity analysis, which I talked about. We've got the Nevada County Airport with the wildfire attack base. That's really a valuable component. I mean, I don't need to say a lot of this, but we have a lot of resources. We have the Firewise USA that provides the Firewise communities. We have a lot of active Firewise communities in our community, and I've mapped them in our safety element. We have the Code Red, which is a really critical program that we have that OES helps us with. The Fire Safe Advisory Committee, which is involved to help protect residents and business owners from wildfires. Other programs that are very creative, like the City Slivers program, residential chipping program, tree brush removal programs, prescriptive grazing programs. We have our website that's coordinated with other agencies. So those are all things that we can bring up in our safety element to say, this is what we're doing. We certainly can go beyond that, but we are limited in our resource availability. Water supply is a critical part of being cognizant and providing protection from fires. About 70% of the city is served city water and 30% by NID. The city has approximately 20 miles of water lines of which about 4.88 miles are over 140 years old. And so we are in the process of updating the water system incrementally, but that's really important to, have adequate water supply. There's other programs we have. We have, in terms of flooding, some identified local flood issues are some of the city streets on Boulder and Sacramento at the intersection of Commercial, Main and Union Streets. We have TJ's Roadhouse, which is located below the grade, which causes flooding. There's the Scotts Flat Dam, which is rated as extreme high hazard for dam failure that could impact the city. So we've got some programs in there to encourage NID to fix that. There's an award going out, but we really need to put the pressure on NID to fix the spillway at Scotts Flat. Some of the other things is essential facilities. I've mapped over 30 of the facilities that are very important. We've added some key facilities that we can use for emergency backup, like some of the schools that could provide potential centers for cooling, weather stations, heat and cold and smoke. We've got tree maintenance programs we need to focus on because, as we know, these fire dangers are going to become more and more of a problem. We have programs to improve our land use entitlement process, like our landscape fund guidelines, which can look at drought tolerant, low fire plants and setting them away from the structures. We've got the circulation element we talked about, the mineral management element, which we might want to be looking at for some of the mines that we have or hazardous mining issues in town, establishing public and private road driveway standards, and updating the noise ordinance. So there's a lot of programs and policies that we've identified in the safety element that are critical. They're not in the current safety element, so I think it's really important that we have them. We have a lot more information now to base our decisions on for new development and how we deal with safety situations in our community. So the next, maybe we should hit the environmental review section of the PowerPoint. That would be page 37. So that's not necessary. We've done a CEQA evaluation because it's a discretionary action.
44
in the packet.
It's subject to CEQA. So in addition to releasing the document for public comment, we've also released a very preliminary initial study and proposed negative declaration, which basically says that the money of the this is a policy document. There's no direct development being proposed. In fact, there's a lot of programs in there that reduce hazards and reduce environmental impacts. So it's a somewhat self-mitigating document. So we are suggesting that when the Planning Commission takes action to recommend approval and the City Council adopts the document, that they'll conclude that there's no significant environmental impact from the project. So as I noticed, we're going to have the public reviews draft and hope to have the Planning Commission review next month, depending on the environmental review and what we get in terms of public comments. And then the City Council public hearing perhaps in August, and then we'll be able to close out the grant. So I look forward to working with you on this project. Any other questions you have this is a really good time because we're going to be really putting the final touches on the document before it gets to you.
Thanks so much, Gary. What a great job all around, you, Paul, and Eric. Are there any questions in the room? Any council members, commissioners, final thoughts here before we jump into final thing? Okay.
You might want to have the. oh, yes,
Chairman Nye
Chris.
actually has a,
Naturally.
Talk a little bit about what's going on with,
oh, please do.
this is Alex from our county.
Hi there, council members, planning commissioners, and members of the public. I'm Alex. I'm a senior analyst in the Office of Emergency Services. And I'll just take a quick minute to kind of walk you through some of the major strategic planning efforts we have going on at the county, just because they do dovetail nicely with what you guys have going on, and they offer opportunities to collaborate at a bit of a larger scale. So the local hazard mitigation plan update has come up. That effort is being funded by FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. We have identified Tetra Tech as the consultant who'll be leading that work. That will launch in the very near term in August and will be wrapped up in about April of 2024. To give you a context, it's an all hazards, multi-jurisdictional local hazard mitigation plan, so it's county-wide. It includes City of Nevada City, City of Grass Valley, Town of Truckee, Nevada Irrigation District, Washington Water District, and Truckee-Donner Public Utilities District, all as part of that. And essentially what that does is it looks at all hazards county-wide. It looks at, for those hazards that have been identified, what is the geographic extent? So how big of an area at the county level would we expect that hazard to occur? What is the likelihood the hazard is going to happen, so the probability, and then what is the area of significance? So to give you an example, localized flooding based on the 2017 local hazard mitigation plan has a geographic extent of about 50%, so 50% of our county is likely to be impacted by it. It's got a probability of 100%, so there's a 100% chance we're going to see localized flooding every year. And then in terms of magnitude, it's up to 25%. So when it happens, we would expect maybe 25% of that area to be impacted. And then based on that, the local hazard mitigation plan will propose actions for mitigating that risk. And the actions can be literally on the ground actions. So again, localized flooding, it could be erosion control, but it could also be education, like increasing people's understanding of the need for flood insurance. And then it proposes metrics and methods to evaluate the effectiveness of a mitigation action. So that's the local hazard mitigation plan, 10,000 foot level. Drilling down a little bit more, we have our community wildfire protection plan update. So that's updating the 2016 community wildfire protection plan. Again, that's county-wide, but the county has been divided into 4 forecast zones for the hazard analysis. And what that means is that in different parts of our county, there is different topography, fuels, and climate, which drive wildfire hazard. And because of that, we want to break the county into areas of analysis that make sense based on the hazard. And so that's one component of the CWPP. The other piece, and we do have copies of the survey information over on the table, because it's really important, the other piece is what's at risk. So what do we value as community members that we would want to protect from the hazard of wildfire? How susceptible are those things to the risk of wildfire? And so the survey is this really key part for informing where we would prioritize areas for treatment. And so the outcome of that CWPP will be the identification of priority areas based on hazard and risk. So if fire happens, how likely is it to burn? And then what do we want to protect? And it's been really interesting so far. We've launched the survey June 1st. It's been out for a month. We have over 1,000 responses. And there really is significant geographic diversity in terms of how communities feel about what they want to protect. So that's the CWPP. Then drilling down a little bit more, we have the evacuation study. And I should have mentioned the CWPP is funded by the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program, and the consultant that's leading that is DUDEC, although we do have an in-house community wildfire coordinator who's doing the modeling. We've kind of developed that modeling approach with CAL FIRE so that it's consistent and totally defensible from a scientific perspective. So, evacuation study funded by CAL FIRE. That will essentially have 3 components. It will have 2 appendices. One of the appendices is an opportunity for community members to provide input on their evacuation concerns. So we're actually intaking information from community members and then putting that into an appendix so that we have a place to go and reference what is of concern to specific communities in Nevada County. The second appendix is a countywide modeling analysis done by Ladris, and that's looking at road congestion and time to look at, for different road segments across Nevada County, how congested is that road segment likely to be, how long is it likely to be congested, and how many people are likely to be impacted by that congestion. Out of that, there'll be a prioritized list that will go towards another consultant, PyroAnalysis, who's actually going to do a robust study on about 5 priority areas or priority scenarios to really dig into a traffic and wildfire modeling analysis to basically try to provide shovel-ready project packages, and they would be our top priorities that we would go after. And those will likely be county-maintained roads because those are the roads that are going to be most likely to be impacted in terms of serving a huge number of people. So those are the 3 plans that we have going down. And obviously, we're really lucky. You mentioned, in Nevada County, we have a really robust community of Firewise communities. We've actually got more than any other county in the nation, which is fantastic. I think we're sitting at over 90 right now. So that really speaks to community level involvement. We also have really great local trusted communication resources like Ubinet, KVMR here in Nevada City. So as far as wildfire goes, we're well positioned to work together on this. And so I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew what planning efforts we had underway and the opportunities for this process to dovetail into what we've got going at the county. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Alex. That was really well done. Alex, can I a quick question?
Oh, yes. Yes, sorry, absolutely. So you can find the survey online at Ready Nevada County, and it's under Roadmap to Resilience. We're actually going to be out at community events all summer. We've got a QR code that you can scan. That's on the flyers over here. It's available in Spanish and English, and we've got paper copies available in Spanish and English as well, because again, it's so important to get that feedback from the community so that we can appropriately scope our projects and approaches to really meet that community need.
Thanks, Alex. Was the CWPP, I thought you guys were doing some newfangled satellite-driven geospatial. Am I wrong on that, or am I just making that?
So, we're using a modeling software called AFIDIS, and it is out of U.S. Forest Service. It is a really sophisticated modeling software, and I honestly am not the best person to ask those technical questions because I am not the modeler. But I can tell you that we worked very closely with CAL FIRE to make sure that all of the modeling inputs were very defensible. So we did things like make sure to identify for each forecast zone the appropriate RAWS weather station to pull information about wind behavior so that those forecast zones were appropriately calibrated. And if people are really interested in the technical details, I'm more than happy to pass that information on to Alessandro Zambrano, who's our in-house modeler.
No, thank you. I just wanted to understand a little bit more. I know it was something fancy and very exciting that we're going to have a better product out of it, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will have a project page. Right now, we've got all 3 plans nested on the Ready Nevada County website under Roadmap to Resilience, but we will be breaking out each of those plans into its own web page as those projects move forward. So there'll be a lot of information available for community consumption. And we are doing a dashboard as part of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, and that will be an interactive geospatial dashboard where you'll be able to do things like look at if I'm interested in implementing a wildfire mitigation project and I'm also interested in protecting a watershed and perhaps a sensitive species. You can turn on layers and look at where is that sweet spot where I could implement that kind of project. Because really what we're hoping to do is create a tool that is usable not just for folks who are interested in wildfire mitigation, but anyone who's working on this fire-adapted landscape. So if I'm a nonprofit that's interested in wildlife protection, and I also am playing on this fire-adapted landscape, where does it make sense for me to do work? Or if I'm interested in critical infrastructure, where does it make sense for me to do that work? And so that we can really fill the spaces between what everyone else is doing. Instead of having this random acts of conservation, we're creating really a contiguous approach.
So excellent, so excellent.
I have a question, unsurprisingly. You excellent dense work, and I really look forward to looking into this stuff more. In communication, though, you didn't mention there's sort of a burgeoning ham radio communication system that's sort of being built on a grassroots basis. You didn't mention that. I mean, our cell phone reception stops when power goes out. It's a problem, and ham radio seems to be an answer to work around cell instability. And I wondered, are you looking at that at all, encouraging the development of the radio network?
So, I mean, as far as specifically related to these strategic plans, no, but I do know that a number of Firewise communities have stood up very robust place-based networks like you're talking about that are serving them incredibly well. And maybe you're aware, because I don't know you personally, so maybe you already know this, but the Coalition of Firewise Communities at one of their recent meetings did have several folks present on this effort,
Okay.
and those meetings are recorded, and there were some excellent presentations by UBET Firewise community, folks in the Deer Creek Canyon, about the different approaches that have really made sense for their place-based community in terms of addressing that very risk of not being able to communicate. And as I mentioned, you know, trusted radio sources like KVMR are always excellent because, believe it or not, hand crank radios can be an incredible tool during times of distress.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you so much. I don't think we have any more questions for you, Alex. Wonderful, thanks for the presentation.
Thanks, Alex.
Back to you, Gary. Is this?
I'm just, I'm here to answer questions.
Okay, so
I'm looking forward to the public hearings with you and adoption. This is a really good opportunity to, look at the document. I encourage you to, let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I've gotten some good notes. I had I think we had some really good, a couple of really good comments from the public. And it was kind of disappointed we didn't get more folks in here because I know the housing element, it was full. And so you'd think the safety would bring them out. But anyway, I'm really glad to be here and happy to be working with y'all.
We're happy to have you as well.
Thanks.
Are there any more questions or comments from the public or anybody at this wonderful table? I think that if, oh, Theo, come on up. We'll give you another bite at the apple.
Thank you. I really appreciated the discussion and great work. I was curious and a little amused that there was so much conversation about noise and things we could do, sounded like ordinances to me, to shield generators or talk about cars. And I just really hope that energy also expands to some of the really, really existential threats to the city. So thank you.
Thanks, Theo.
Thanks, Theo.
Okay, did you have a
I
question?
do, I
Yes.
do. On the question of evacuations, I know it's tricky because it's the incident drives the evacuation or whatever. I live in the Deer Creek area, so right across from the school buses coming in, we have no idea what's going to happen. So I don't know how deep this project is going to go into evacuation decisions and who makes them. Do the police just show up at the corner and say, go this way and go that way? Or is it KVMR? Is it Ubinet? What, are we going to see resources or at least some education at the neighborhood level?
Yeah.
So what to expect? We know you can't do a blueprint because everyone is different, but what do you expect? Who shows up? Who do you call? That sort of thing. I don't know if that's part of this study.
We identify, we have a whole section on evacuation, and we talk about, the basic two ways out of town.
Yep.
And then to go beyond that, really without having more information that Alex is talking about, an actual capacity analysis done by a licensed traffic engineer that can kind of identify those locations that are really tight, what we do with them, how we direct traffic out, what's the best way to evacuate the community. Those are all coming. They're, you know, so the safety element basically says, we need this to happen.
And those last two issues are the one that is of concern of the residents in the neighborhoods, you know. Who's coming, who's going to tell us what to do?
Peter, so, you know, I think the county is going to be doing a much more robust evacuation route planning, and, you know, they're going to drive that. But I think in the Deer Creek fire project that we're doing, at the request of wonderful Nancy Weber, we put in.
My neighbor.
Yeah, your neighbor, and just a wonderful person. We put in some, I don't know how much, you know, how deep it's going to go, but there's going to be some evacuation route planning done in the Deer Creek area based on that grant. No? Sean's shaking his head.
Sean, you want to come up and speak to this?
That was not funded by SNC, that component.
They didn't fund that.
So it's the environmental planning component that was funded.
Okay, all right, never mind.
Like we'll
Okay.
have a circulation
tried.
element.
We'll try
And Some
again.
of this is fairly recent stuff, you
Yeah.
know. I've been seeing some of the, what's called AB 747, you know, documents around there. And some of them are really good, and we're doing one at county level, and hopefully they'll be picking up a lot of the Nevada City area, and then we can use that information as a basis to help us, you know, improve our circulation element and help, you know, define our evacuation capacity needs.
Exactly. Sean, you have some more insight.
So I wanted to make sure, Peter, that we're not blowing you off. It's just, it's probably not in this, it's not in the CAPC, but it's very important to us that anything that anybody has, whether they're watching at home, they're here tonight, they think of something later, you can email Lisa. We'll put it into the process. That will be coming. It will be an outcropping, just like our CWPP and an action plan for wildfire from the city will be an outcropping of what the county's efforts are. The same thing will happen with evacuation. And it's important that it does because it hasn't historically, right?
Yes.
And so the most important thing is that the communication pathways to the actual residents that are going to be directly impacted by it, that's coming even later down the road. But if you make those comments now and we include them in the planning piece, we can perpetuate that down as those next documents and those next actions come. So those are really important. I just want to make sure that we're not, you don't feel like we're just, no, we're not doing that now. Even if we're not doing it now, we will be doing it in the future. And Gary talked about our partnerships or our need to partner. Alex is on our Fire Safety Advisory Committee, so is Theo. So two very intelligent folks that have a wealth of knowledge on some particularly specific things. Theo's a botanist, right? And Alex obviously comes from OES, and that's just a small snippet of what we have on our Fire Safety Advisory Committee. So that is the vehicle that will help us take the community's input and put it into action as these things come forward.
That's good to know. It's kind of like the who and what.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or
Thank
what
you,
and who.
Sean. All right. If that is it for you, Gary, and we don't have any more questions from the council or the commissioners, I think we're going to look for
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Tom seconds.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, let's adjourn. Thank you, everyone. That was a
Thank
wonderful
you.
meeting.
Thank you to the county for showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.